Professor Zix 427 slithered into the prestigious Galactic Academy's xenobiology classroom, their phosphorescent tentacles rippling with the particular shade of green that their species used to express barely contained excitement. The class of 30 advanced students, representing 12 different species from across the known universe, turned their various sensory organs toward the front of the room. Today, the professor announced, their translator converting their natural whistles into standard galactic common, we begin our most fascinating unit yet. They paused for dramatic effect, something they'd learned from studying Earth entertainment broadcasts. We will be examining specimens from classification XB 7734, commonly known as Earth. A collective groan rippled through the classroom. Graxon Tar, a crystalline being from the silicon-based worlds, actually dimmed their luminescence in disappointment. Not Earth again, muttered Clix, a methane-breathing entity who had to attend class in a specialized containment suit. We get it. They're made of meat, and they somehow managed to split atoms without crystalline computing. Ah, Professor Zix 427's tentacles shifted to a smug purple. But this time, we're not studying their technology or their peculiar habit of sending digital messages with primitive emoji hieroglyphics. We're studying their biological defense mechanisms. What defense mechanisms? Snorted Yorvin, the class's top warrior caste student. His scaled exoskeleton gleamed under the quantum lights as he flexed his 4 combat arms. They're basically bags of water with calcium support struts. One good plasma burst and they're done. The professor's tentacles rippled with amusement. Indeed? Then perhaps you'd be interested to know that Earth hosts over 10 million species, many of which have evolved defense mechanisms that would give even your prestigious warrior caste pause. Impossible, Yorvin declared, mandibles clicking in derision. My species evolved in the methane storms of Krill Prime. We survived the Great Vacuum Wars. Nothing from a Class 3 gravity world could possibly... Then you'll be particularly interested in tomorrow's specimen, Professor Zix 427 interrupted, their tentacles now practically strobing with barely contained mirth. We'll be examining a creature approximately 1.5 centimeters in length, weighing about 0.1 Earth grams. The class burst into laughter. Even the normally stoic, gelatinous students in the back row rippled with amusement bubbles. What's it going to do? Yorvin jeered. Exist at us threateningly? Professor Zix 427's tentacles shifted to the deepest shade of purple any of them had ever seen, the color of absolute certainty mixed with devious anticipation. Oh, you'll see. For homework, please review the basic principles of Earth protein structures and the concept they call allergic reactions. Tomorrow's class will be memorable. As the students filed out, still chuckling among themselves, the professor's tentacles wrapped around a secure container marked with more warning symbols than seemed necessary for its size. Inside, suspended in a stasis field, a single Earth honeybee floated peacefully, unaware it was about to become the center of an interstellar incident. The next day, Yorvin strutted into class with all 4 arms laden with combat trophies from his family's collection. A ceremonial plasma blade here, a victory skull there, clearly meant to intimidate whatever pathetic Earth specimen the professor had in store. Behold, Professor Zix 427 announced, their tentacles now a brilliant shade of anticipatory gold, as they gestured to a small stasis field hovering above their desk. Apis mellifera, the common honeybee. The class crowded forward, then collectively took 3 steps back in disappointment. Even with the holographic magnification, the creature looked absurdly unimpressive. 6 tiny legs, a fuzzy thorax, and 2 pairs of transparent wings that looked like they'd tear in a light breeze. That's it, Yorvin's mandibles clattered with laughter. That's your deadly Earth specimen. I've stepped on space dust with more threatening qualities. Clix raised a manipulator appendage. Professor, according to my research, these creatures make sweet nutritional supplements for human larvae. They're practically food processors with wings. Technically correct, the professor's tentacles swirled in an elaborate pattern indicating both agreement and amusement. They are known for producing a substance called honey, but they're also known for something else. Computer, display Earth historical records regarding annual honeybee-related fatalities. Numbers flickered across the quantum display. Several students blinked their various optical organs in surprise. Surely that's a translation error, Graxantar's crystalline form vibrated in disbelief. How could something so small? The data is correct, Professor Zix 427 confirmed. This specimen possesses a venom delivery system that, while fatal to the bee itself when used, can trigger catastrophic reactions in certain organisms. The humans themselves often fear these creatures despite their size. Yorvin stood up, all four arms crossed in defiance. With all due respect, Professor, I believe your research is flawed. No warrior caste member of any advanced species could possibly be threatened by such an insignificant creature. I formally challenge this specimen to combat. The classroom erupted in chaos. Gelatinous students formed excited bubbles, crystalline beings chimed in harmonic amusement, and even the methane breathers' containment suits vibrated with interest. Interesting proposition. The professor's tentacles shifted to a thoughtful blue, though perhaps we should first review the safety protocols. I'll sign any waiver, Yorvin interrupted. My exoskeleton can withstand micrometeorite impacts. This will be the shortest battle in Academy history. A betting pool immediately formed in the back of the class. Quantum credits started flowing as odds were calculated. Most bets favored Yorvin, naturally, but a few of the more scientifically minded students placed cautious bets on the bee, having actually done their homework about Earth protein structures. Professor Zix 427's tentacles flashed warning red. Very well, but I must insist on proper safety measures. We'll conduct this experiment in the xenobiology containment chamber tomorrow. I expect everyone to review the medical protocols for Earth-based venom exposure before then. Won't need them, Yorvin boasted, mandibles raised in a warrior's grin, but I appreciate your concern for the bee's safety. As the class filed out, already discussing what would surely be the most entertaining xenobiology lesson of the semester, Professor Zix 427 noticed that exactly 3 students had downloaded the emergency medical protocols, all of them from species known for their thorough research habits. The professor's tentacles shifted to a complex pattern that, in their species' color language, roughly translated to youth, overconfidence, and ignorance, are about to meet one of evolution's finest tiny warriors. They carefully adjusted the stasis field containing the honeybee, whose only response was to clean its antennae, completely unaware of its upcoming role in an interstellar teaching moment. Word spread through the academy like a quantum wave collapse. By morning, the xenobiology research lab was packed with students poring over Earth databases, though their motivations had less to do with academic curiosity and more to do with refining their betting odds. Look at this anatomical scan. Clicks pointed a manipulator at the holographic display. The stinger is barely a millimeter long. It can't even penetrate Yorvin's outer exoskeletal layer. A cluster of gelatinous students bubbled in agreement, their translucent forms reflecting the blue light of the displays. One of them, Blob, they'd chosen the name specifically to annoy their more formally named classmates, absorbed a data crystal and rippled thoughtfully. But check out these chemical components, Blob burbled. The venom contains melatonin, phospholipase A2, hyaluronidase. Their surface rippled with concern. Anyone else notice how these match the warning labels on our xenobiology lab safety protocols? Yorvin, who'd been polishing his exoskeleton with military-grade combat wax, waved all 4 arms dismissively. Chemical analysis is for support casts. Watch this. He proceeded to headbutt the reinforced wall, leaving a noticeable dent. That's warrior caste density. No earthbug is getting through this. Meanwhile, in the corner, 3 students huddled around a particularly disturbing hologram. Graxantar's crystalline form hummed with concern as they reviewed footage of Earth allergic reactions. Fascinating and horrifying, they chimed. The human immune system sometimes overreacts so severely to the venom that it attacks itself. Anaphylactic shock, they call it. That's mammals for you, clicks buzzed through their containment suit. Always letting their proteins get emotional. Good thing we're more evolved than that. Professor Zix 427 slithered between research stations, their tentacles cycling through shades of concern and amusement. They paused at a terminal displaying the bee's defensive mechanisms in detail, the barbed stinger, the venom sac, the complex cocktail of proteins and enzymes designed to cause maximum disruption to an attacker's biological systems. Finding anything interesting? They asked innocently. Nothing concerning, Yorvin called from his grooming station, though I am impressed by the creature's determination, sacrificing itself to attack a threat, almost warrior-like in a primitive way. The professor's tentacles flickered with an untranslatable color pattern. Ah yes, the ultimate defense mechanism. Tell me, has anyone analyzed why the bee evolved this particular strategy? A quiet student in the back, whose species communicated through spore releases, emitted a thoughtful purple cloud. Because individually they're expendable, the colony survives even if one defender falls. Precisely, the professor's tentacles brightened. And what does that suggest about the effectiveness of their defense? That it must be worth dying for, Graxantar hummed quietly. Yorvin flexed his combat-hardened exoskeleton, the morning light gleaming off its polished surface, or that Earth evolution is as inefficient as their spacecraft designs. Who designs a weapon that destroys itself after one use? Someone who only needs one use, the spore-speaking student whispered, but only Blob caught the comment, absorbing it with a worried ripple. The research continued through the day. Students ran simulations, analyzed chemical compositions, and placed increasingly complex bets. A secondary betting pool formed around specific medical outcomes, though most dismissed it as paranoid overthinking. By evening, Yorvin had attracted a small crowd of admirers. He demonstrated combat stances from his warrior caste training, each move precisely calibrated for maximum intimidation effect. His exoskeleton now gleamed with 3 separate layers of combat wax. The key to warrior caste superiority, he lectured, mandibles clicking authoritatively, is psychological dominance. Once this bee recognizes me as the apex predator I am, it will likely submit without even attempting to sting. In the back of the lab, Professor Zix 427's tentacles twisted into the color pattern for dramatic irony as they finalized the medical bay preparations. They noted with interest that the 3 students who'd actually studied Earth biology had moved their bets from the victory condition pool to the medical emergency response time pool. Computer, Yorvin announced grandly, display my opponent's brain capacity versus mine. The holographic comparison appeared, showing the bee's tiny ganglial neural clusters next to Yorvin's considerably larger brain structure. See, he gestured triumphantly with all 4 arms. Its entire neural network could fit in my secondary thinking lobe. How could it possibly pose a threat? The spore-speaking student released another quiet purple cloud, the same way a quantum mine doesn't need to be smart to blow up a battleship. But Yorvin was too busy practicing his victory pose to notice the warning signs. The concerned glances between the more studious students, the professor's increasingly complex color patterns, and most tellingly the fact that the medical bay had just requisitioned 3 times their normal supply of emergency anti-venom compounds. The Honeybee, still floating peacefully in its stasis field, continued grooming its antennae with the calm precision of a creature that had no need to boast about its capabilities. After all, several million years of evolution had already refined it into exactly what it needed to be, a perfect reminder that on Earth, size wasn't everything. The Academy's xenobiology containment chamber had never seen such a crowd. Students from all departments packed the observation deck, their various biological and mechanical cooling systems struggling to keep up with the collective excitement. The chamber itself, designed to contain everything from quantum phase predators to gaseous intelligences, seemed almost embarrassingly oversized for its current purpose. Professor Zix 427 slithered through final safety checks, their tentacles a professional shade of grey despite the ridiculousness of the situation. Last chance to review the medical protocols, Yorvin. Unnecessary, Yorvin declared, stretching all 4 arms in warrior caste warm-up exercises. His exoskeleton gleamed under the quantum lights, each plate freshly polished and reinforced. But I appreciate the concern, Professor. I'll try not to damage your specimen too badly. The observation deck's betting systems chimed constantly as last-minute wagers poured in. The odds heavily favored Yorvin, though a suspicious number of biology students had bet on medical intervention required, regardless of the winner. Releasing specimen in 3, 2, Professor Zix 427's tentacles shifted to emergency red. 1, the stasis field disappeared. The Honeybee, finally free after hours of confinement, did what honeybees do best. It started exploring its new environment with methodical efficiency. It buzzed in a casual figure-8 pattern, antennae testing the air currents. That's it? Yorvin's mandibles clicked in disappointment. It's not even acknowledging my warrior presence. He performed an intimidating combat stance that had once made a Rogelian cave stalker retreat in fear. The bee continued its survey, completely unimpressed. Perhaps it's afraid, Yorvin announced to the crowd. Understandable given my obvious superiority. Allow me to demonstrate my species' evolved combat reflexes. He launched into a complex series of martial arts moves, his forearms slicing through the air with precision. The bee landed on a nearby monitoring device and began cleaning its wings. In the observation deck, credit transfers pinged as new bets formed around how long it would take Yorvin to lose his temper. The smart money was on any second now. This is unacceptable. Yorvin's mandibles clattered with indignation. I challenge you, Earth creature. Face me in honorable combat. He stepped closer, looming over the tiny insect with his full warrior caste height. The bee, perhaps deciding this large, noisy thing was getting too close for comfort, took flight again. It buzzed past Yorvin's head, causing him to snap at it with all four arms. Stand still and fight me, Yorvin demanded, his movements becoming less precise and more agitated. How dare you refuse combat with a warrior caste champion? Professor Zix 427's tentacles flashed warning patterns. Remember the safety protocols about rapid movements. But Yorvin was beyond listening. His warrior pride, carefully cultivated through years of combat training, couldn't handle being ignored by something so small. He lunged forward, attempting to grab the bee with his upper right arm. Time seemed to slow down. The bee, operating on instincts refined through millions of years of evolution, responded to the threat exactly as its genes programmed it to. It turned, oriented its abdomen, and Yaga! The sound Yorvin made transcended language barriers. His translator glitched, trying to convey the mixture of shock, outrage, and sudden concern that filled his voice. The stinger, tiny but perfectly designed, had found a gap between his exoskeletal plates, the exact kind of vulnerable spot warrior caste members were trained to protect. I've been struck, he announced unnecessarily, staring at the tiny barb lodged in his armor joint. The creature has actually... His voice trailed off as he noticed something odd about his vision. In the observation deck, credit transfers reached a frenzy as the medical emergency betting pool suddenly became very relevant. The 3 students who'd actually studied Earth biology were already calling the medical bay. Interesting, Professor Zix 427 noted, their tentacles cycling through emergency response colors. It appears your species shares certain protein structures with Earth vertebrates. Most fascinating. Medical team to the containment chamber, please. Yorvin tried to respond with something appropriately warrior-like, but his translator was having trouble processing the sounds coming from his mandibles. His exoskeleton, source of so much pride, felt uncomfortably tight. All 4 arms began developing an interesting purple tinge that definitely wasn't part of his species' normal coloration. The bee, having paid the ultimate price for defending itself, lay still on the chamber floor. Its tiny form seemed even more insignificant next to the rapidly swelling warrior student. Can't breathe properly, Yorvin managed through his increasingly constricted airways. Not possible. Oh, but it is. Professor Zix 427's tentacles formed the pattern for lesson incoming as the medical team burst through the chamber doors. You see, class, this is why we emphasize thorough research over assumptions. The honeybee venom contains... But the rest of the lesson was lost in the chaos of emergency medical response. Yorvin, pride of the warrior caste, had to be carried out on a stretcher designed for beings 3 times his normal size, his exoskeleton now exhibiting several colors not previously known to exist in his species biology. As the medical team rushed him away, Professor Zix 427 carefully collected the fallen bee, their tentacles showing respect for a tiny warrior that had, in its own way, demonstrated one of the universe's most important lessons: never underestimate Earth evolution. In the observation deck, a quiet spore cloud of "told you so" drifted among the stunned observers, while the betting systems processed the most lopsided victory in Academy history. The Academy's medical bay erupted into controlled chaos as Yorvin's hover stretcher burst through the quantum doors. His normally impressive exoskeleton had swollen to nearly twice its normal size, displaying colors that made several medical sensors short-circuit in confusion. Patient is experiencing an acute systemic reaction to Earth-based protein compounds, announced Dr. Plex 8, their cybernetic diagnosis arrays whirring in distress. Multiple organ systems affected. Someone get me the xenobiology reference files. Reference files won't help, Buzz clicks, who'd followed the medical team. Earth biology operates on completely different principles. Their immune responses are like badly programmed maintenance nanites. They sometimes attack the host. Yorvin tried to maintain his warrior caste dignity, but it's hard to look intimidating when your exoskeleton is changing colors like a malfunctioning quantum display. Is not that bad, he managed, though his translator rendered it as, help everything itches. 3 more medical specialists rushed in, each carrying different emergency treatment devices, none of them designed for Earth-based venom reactions. What do you mean the anti-venom synthesizer can't process the molecular structure? Dr. Plex 8's cybernetic eyes spun in frustration. It's just proteins. We handle proteins all the time. Earth proteins are different, Blob oozed through the door, followed by Grax and Tar. They're like quantum particles. They change when you try to observe them. Normal anti-venom protocols just make them angry. Yorvin's condition wasn't improving. His respiratory channels had swollen so much that his backup breathing systems had to kick in, and even those were struggling. All 4 arms had seized up in what the medical sensors insisted was both a flex and a spasm simultaneously, defying several laws of physics. Someone call Professor Zix 427, ordered Dr. Plex 8. We need that Earth biology database access now. Already here. The professor's tentacles swirled a professional mix of concern and told you so as they slithered in. And I brought something better than a database. Computer, establish emergency communication link with Earth Medical Exchange Program. The quantum display flickered to life, showing a human doctor whose expression shifted from professional interest to barely concealed amusement as they took in the scene. Let me guess, the human said. Someone had a close encounter with Earth wildlife. Professor Zix 427's tentacles flushed an embarrassed purple. A honeybee, specifically. It seems our warrior caste student shares some unfortunate protein compatibility with Earth vertebrates. Right, the human doctor's professionalism wrestled briefly with their desire to laugh. Professionalism won, but only barely. You'll need to start with epinephrine or your species equivalent, then corticosteroids to manage the immune response, and get that stinger out if you haven't already. It's still pumping venom as we speak. The medical team jumped into action, though not before several of them had to look up what epinephrine was and why Earth biology thought fighting poison with more poison was a good idea. Can't feel mandibles, Yorvin managed through his failing translator. His exoskeleton had now swollen enough that he looked like a warrior caste balloon animal. Perfectly normal reaction, the human doctor assured him. Well, normal for an abnormal situation where an alien species turns out to be allergic to Earth B venom, which happens more often than you'd think, actually. Last month, we had a case with a Centaurian ambassador and a paper wasp. The medical bay's synthesis units worked overtime to produce Earth-compatible treatments. Blob, whose gelatinous form was good for absorbing and processing information, helped translate Earth medical terms into something the Academy's systems could understand. Fascinating immune cascade effects, Professor Zix 427 noted, their tentacles shifting to scientific curiosity despite the emergency. The venom triggers a response, which triggers another response, which triggers less observing, more treating, Dr. Plex 8 snapped, cybernetic arrays spinning as they administered another dose of synthetic epinephrine. His exoskeleton wasn't designed to stretch this far. Gradually, thanks to the combination of Earth medical knowledge and Academy technology, Yorvin's condition began to stabilize. His colors settled into a more normal range, though with an interesting new pattern that would take weeks to fade. His breathing eased and his translator started producing comprehensible sounds again, instead of what seemed to be remixes of warrior caste distress calls. Remember, the human doctor advised, he'll need to carry an auto-injector from now on. Any future exposure could trigger an even stronger reaction. An auto-injector? Yorvin's mandibles clicked weakly. A warrior caste member carrying emergency medical equipment, like some sort of support caste? Better than carrying an emergency burial pod, Blob burbled helpfully, earning a crystalline chime of agreement from Grax and Tar. As the crisis subsided, Professor Zix 427's tentacles formed the subtle pattern that meant waiting for the lesson to sink in. They didn't have to wait long. Professor, Yorvin asked, his voice humble in a way warrior-caste vocals rarely managed, about tomorrow's xenobiology homework. Perhaps I could do extra credit. I feel my previous research was insufficient. The human doctor smirked. Let me guess, he didn't study the material before challenging the bee. It would appear Professor Zix 427's tentacles rippled with barely contained amusement, that some lessons about Earth biology require practical demonstration. The medical team began post-crisis procedures, their diagnostic systems still trying to catalogue all the interesting ways Earth proteins had rearranged Yorvin's biochemistry. In the corner, Blob absorbed a data crystal about Earth's other venomous creatures and rippled with newfound respect. Just wait until they get to the platypus unit, the human doctor muttered, signing off with a knowing smile. 2 weeks after the bee incident, now officially added to Academy safety protocols, Yorvin entered the xenobiology classroom with a noticeably different demeanor. His exoskeleton had mostly returned to its normal size, though certain plates still bore an interesting shimmer when viewed under quantum lights. The auto-injector holstered at his side drew no comments, though some noticed it was decorated with warrior-caste honors, making medical necessity look like a combat accessory. Today, Professor Zix 427 announced, their tentacles a professional shade of satisfaction. We continue our Earth biology unit with student presentations. Who would like to go first? Yorvin raised all 4 arms, something that would have been unthinkable 3 weeks ago. Honored classmates, he began, activating the holographic display. My research focuses on Earth's most efficient defensive specialists, the Hymenoptera order. His mandibles clicked in newfound respect, specifically why something so small needs such an effective weapon. The class unconsciously leaned away from the rotating image of a honeybee. Even the gelatinous students formed protective bubbles. Consider the efficiency, Yorvin continued, gesturing with his upper right arm while the others maintained perfect warrior-caste posture. The venom requires only 0.1 micrograms to trigger a full immune response. My own warrior-caste toxins need 300 times that amount. We've been engineering biological weapons for 10,000 years, yet Earth evolution created something better by accident. Professor Zix 427's tentacles rippled with approval. Next up was Blob, who had absorbed so much Earth biology data that they'd developed a slightly yellow and black striped pattern. My research explores other Earth defensive adaptations. Did you know they have mammals that deploy chemical warfare by spraying targeted compounds at opponents, and spiders that use molecular machines to transform proteins into trap threads stronger than our best combat polymers? The presentations continued. Graxantar resonated about box jellyfish venom that could stop a being's quantum functions. Clicks explained how Earth octopi could reshape their molecular structure to squeeze through impossibly small spaces. The spore-speaking student released detailed chemical analyses of poisoned dart frogs that could kill with a single touch. Most remarkable, mused Professor Zix 427, their tentacles forming complex patterns of scientific appreciation. How each of you has found something in Earth biology that challenges our assumptions about technological progress. That's the true lesson, isn't it? Yorvin stood again, his warrior-caste training now tempered with academic insight. We assumed that because humans are still learning to manipulate quantum fields, their planet's biology must be primitive, but they evolved in an environment that makes our harshest colony worlds look like relaxation chambers. Indeed, the professor's tentacles shifted to teaching mode purple. Earth's gravity alone would crush most of us. Their temperature range spans over 150 degrees. Their oceans are acid by our standards. In that context, Yorvin finished, even their smallest creatures had to become warriors to survive. He patted his auto-injector almost fondly. The honeybee doesn't care about honor or combat aesthetics. It simply does what millions of years of evolution designed it to do, defend its colony at any cost. The class murmured in agreement. Several students glanced at their own research notes, wondering what other Earth surprises awaited them. Professor Zix 427 slithered to the center of the room, their tentacles radiating smug satisfaction. And that brings us to next week's unit. They activated a new hologram. We'll be studying something even more fascinating, Earth's marine biology, specifically the creature humans call the cone snail. Yorvin's translator glitched as he tried to process this. Snail? Like those gel trail creatures that move slower than planetary drift? Oh yes, the professor's tentacles twirled with delighted anticipation. Would anyone care to guess how many neurotoxins one shell contains? Or why humans consider them more dangerous than plasma weapons? The class scrambled for their datapads. In the back, the betting systems pinged as new wagers formed, this time about who would actually do the required reading before handling specimens. One final note, Professor Zix 427 added. The Academy Board has approved my proposal. Starting next semester, Earth Biology will be a mandatory course for all Warrior Caste students, with practical demonstrations, of course. Yorvin's mandibles clicked in what might have been a laugh. Good. Perhaps we'll finally learn some real combat chemistry instead of just polishing our exoskeletons. He paused thoughtfully. Though I still recommend the polishing, warrior traditions die hard. As the class filed out, already debating which Earth creature would feature in the next safety protocol update, Professor Zix 427's tentacles formed one final pattern, the complex swirl that meant mission accomplished. On their desk, next to the lesson plans for cone snails, box jellies and platypuses, sat a small preserved honeybee in a quantum stasis field. Its tiny form seemed to gleam with the satisfaction of a job well done. The warning label on its container had been upgraded from caution to approach with respect, a change that would soon be applied to Earth specimens across the galaxy. After all, any planet that could turn a nectar-sipping insect into a warrior worthy of legend clearly deserved a second look at its biological credentials. And somewhere in the Academy's medical bay, a new plaque hung on the wall. Size matters not, Earth proverb. Below it, in smaller text, especially when it comes to bees,